No, thank you for having me. This is great. This is great. I'm
Yeah.
really a fan of your series, so I'm glad that I could be a part of it.
Well, it's funny because I was down at UVA while you were doing your thing, basketball and soccer, and then by the time I'd gotten back from UVA, I graduated law school in '91. That's when you went up there. So I kind of missed your whole career. And I was talking to Coach Jim Smith, as you know,
Mhm.
and Coach he's now at Meridian, which was George Mason High School in Falls Church, but he
Yeah.
won tons of games at Chantilly. Well, I was talking to him, and he was like, "Yeah, this Nate Friends really changed the arc of my career in McLean High School." And then he just happened to say, "Yeah," and he happened to win two NCAA games championships with game-winning goals. I'm like, "What?" So I got to talk to this guy. So that's how the whole thing started.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. That's fantastic. Yeah, Coach Smith is great. He was when I came into McLean, I moved to Northern Virginia my ninth grade year from Greensboro, North Carolina, where I lived previously, um, and when I met Coach Smith, it was my second year in McLean. I wasn't eligible to play sports my first year because I transferred from high school in Greensboro, and it was an open gym, and I was a late bloomer physically, so I was pretty small. Coming in the ninth grade, I was probably about 5'4", 5'5". Always played soccer, so really wasn't an issue in terms of my height. But in terms of basketball, it's something I just did for fun. And met him at an open gym, and I just kind of started to hit like a really wicked growth spurt, and was playing. And he was like, "Hey, look, you should really consider, you know, playing basketball." And I had played basketball before, but I hadn't really taken it as seriously because soccer was always a priority for me. He really showed me from the basics all the way up until my senior year. He just really taught me how to play. Overall, just from the basic stuff, from how to play defense to all the way through to how to use my physical gifts and skills to on the offensive end too as well. Really refine my shooting form and just all the way through. And so I was really really lucky to come across him at the time that I did. Overall, I think I would have still played basketball. My father played basketball in college at Loyola Chicago. We're a basketball family. Even my daughter played basketball all the way through high school at a very high level. So, but to come across him was really sort of a blessing because he really taught me the fundamentals and really gave me the opportunity to not only play, to be successful in high school, but I had a lot of opportunities to play in college too as well. Even though I chose to play soccer, I did have a lot of opportunities to play basketball in college too as well, and that was, all because of him. So very very lucky, and I think my soccer career is the same. I had a lot of coaches that I came across that, looking back in retrospect, were really really great coaches. Went on to have really great careers, and I just was very fortunate to come across them at the time that I did.
Well, so this, there wasn't a whole lot of soccer going on. Well, I'm 7 years older than you. So when I was growing up, they played soccer in Northern Virginia. It was big kind of in Bowie and parts of Maryland. It was big in New Jersey. It was big
Mm,
in Long Island. It was
right.
starting to grow everywhere. But to have a soccer player come in from North Carolina. So my guess is, I know your father was an exec with AT&T. I bet
Mm-hmm.
you at some point you must have been in New Jersey or somewhere else because that's where
That's
soccer. Yeah.
That's exactly right. You're spot on. So I grew up in a couple of places. So when I was born in the Washington D.C. area. My father is an attorney, retired now, but he was working at the Department of Justice. He was an attorney in the Civil Rights Division. My mom was working at the Office of Management and Budget. She has a master's degree in econ from Howard. My dad went to undergrad at Loyola Chicago, where he played basketball, but also went to law school at University of Wisconsin, which is where I eventually went to law school. And my mom went undergrad at Toulouse. So I grew up I was born in D.C., but we quickly moved to New Jersey, where AT&T was based. And I lived in South Orange, New Jersey. And that's where, when I became school age, the local kids was a very eclectic mix of immigrants in that area. A very folks from the Ukraine, from all different spaces. And then you also had this Black sort of professional population too, as well, that lived there overall. And all the kids were playing soccer. And it all came down to really kind of one family, which was the Chisowitz family. Walter and Eugene Chisowitz. Walt Chisowitz was the national team coach at the time. Eugene Chisowitz was our local high school coach, but also ran the club, the Cougar Soccer Club. And I got started with that club when I was literally 5 or 6 years old. My next door neighbor played. We played in their front yard. My parents let me play whatever sport I wanted to. I played a lot of sports. I mean, and getting involved with the Cougar Soccer Club early, we were 6 years old playing U8, U9. I mean, we were really into it. We had an Adidas sponsorship. We were a bunch of local kids. I think there was 20 of us. I want to say like 18 or 19 of us ended up playing Division I college soccer. But again, just right place, right time. Eugene Chisowitz, really showed me the basics of how to play. But also, we were a very diverse group too, as well. Half the team, I believe, is Black, which was almost unheard of. And the rest were all from sort of origins from other countries too, as well. Real love for the sport. My parents knew nothing about it. I showed up to the first tryout with football cleats and tube socks.
White cleats.
Yeah, literally. I had the spot built O.J. Simpson cleats that my dad got me because my parents, based in like football, baseball, and I played those sports too as well. But it was like, hey, just put these on, and they had metal on them, and they were like, you can't wear those. And so I came out there, and we had an indoor soccer league, and I just did it because the neighbors did it, and was pretty hyperactive child. So they were like, hey, why don't we put them in as many sports as possible? So you name it, ice hockey, did that for 4 or 5 seasons, baseball, football. Ironically, I did not play basketball though. I played with my father, and he played in some semi-pro sort of pro-am leagues and stuff. And I kind of tagged along with him, but I never really played that because it always conflicted with indoor soccer. And that's what I wanted to play. And tennis. My uncle on my mother's side played tennis at the University of Wisconsin, which is ironically how my parents met. My dad was a lawyer. I mean, was in law school at the University of Wisconsin, was his English tutor, and in undergrad when he was an undergrad. And then when my dad graduated, he said, "Hey, you should look up my sister. She's in D.C. since you're going to go work for the Department of Justice." And that's how my parents met. But all these sports were always sort of things that I played, and each, as long as my grades were good, my parents said, you can do whatever you want. So they would take me. It's crazy to think of the schedule now because I have kids that are very active, and but my dad would get up at 4 and 5 in the morning, take me to the rink because we were the youngest age groups, so we had the worst rink time. So we had 6 a.m. games for hockey, and then bring me home, drop me off. My mom would then take me to baseball, or football, depending on the season. And then in the afternoon, we'd all get back together, and then I'd go play a soccer game, which is just crazy. But I did all of that in one day. And getting into the sport, that's just how I got into it. Was just my friends played, I liked it. And then we started traveling. And then, as I got older, I started narrowing down the sports that I liked. And it really kind of got narrowed down to soccer and basketball and tennis. Tennis was something that I played my freshman year in high school in Greensboro before moving, and, had a tough time letting go because I had played that for such a long time too as well. But I just like playing different sports, and I think they all complemented each other and kind of made me better at all of them.
Do you think today you would have been a specialist? Because nowadays, especially with soccer and highly skilled sports like baseball, kids tend to specialize, and parents kind of spend all their time and effort into that. I mean, all these sports came pretty easy to you.
it would have been very difficult. And I kind of look at my son and my daughter in that regard. My son plays for the Sounders Academy.
Oh, wow.
He plays for the U15 Sounders Academy. He's in the national team pool for U15. He's a
Wow,
very,
that's
very good
awesome.
player. He's actually a much better player at his age than I was. And my wife ran track at Virginia. She was an All-American sprinter, 100, 200 meters. We met there, and he's a perfect combination of us in terms of he has her speed. He's got my, my skill and sort of, just a very good athlete. So, and my daughter was too as well, but it's a different time, I think he would have been just as good at any other sport that he would have tried. He ran track in middle school, broke a number of state records, and play basketball, is very good at it, but the schedules, you just can't reconcile them anymore. No longer are things seasonal. They're year round, especially when you get into areas like where we are in Seattle, where the weather really isn't that bad and you can play soccer year round. It's hard, and we struggled at times with, he would play AAU basketball and soccer, and he'd have a tournament the same weekend, and he'd have to choose. So before we went into that, we just sat him down and said, hey, what's your priority? And let's just figure that out now before we have conflicts, because you're going to get pressure from coaches and things like that. I never had to do any of that. All the stuff was local. We didn't travel as much. Even the times, I can't remember really having anything overlap overall. Early morning was hockey, midday was baseball, afternoon was soccer, and they kept it that way on purpose. And now it's just not possible. He had to let go of AAU basketball about a year and a half ago, and track as well, to focus on soccer, because it's, he plays year round. They travel, both domestically and internationally. And, when you play at a high level like that, they expect your full, sort of attention and time. And so for me, that was tough, because I just wanted him to make sure that he was, in what he wanted to do. My daughter's the same way with AAU basketball. She ran track and played soccer too, and had to let those go a lot earlier than I did. Overall in high school, I was able to play two sports, and same premise in my household as it was my parents. As long as their grades are good, then they could pretty much do what they want. But nowadays, it is completely different.
Are you happy with the MLS system? Like for example, if you live in Holland, like my son has traveled over there and played with teams, and you travel to local clubs. Their system is managed. It's managed nationally, and the local clubs all have teams, and the best players are constantly being funneled to the better clubs in the region. And then if you get really good, you might go to the Ajax or Utrecht or the nearest Division I club. But it's always local first, and then you can kind of play your way into more of a national type of presence. Here in America, like for example, and you might be out of the scene a little bit, Bethesda's a great club. Arlington's a great club. Like Alexandria, my son's former club, is a good club. Well, some of them are MLS Next or MLS. Some of them are just ECNL. So the ECNL kids they can play high school, but they can play other sports. If you're MLS, it's like you said, it's much more serious. You can't play high school. You really can't play other sports. How do you feel about all that? Do you think it's a good system?
I think it is. I think it has its positives. There's some negatives too as well. I look at my journey, and I was very, very fortunate. One, to be in South Orange at the time that I was, to have Eugene Chiswick sort of guide my early career and build my love for the sport. Back then soccer wasn't on TV, but we always had someone on the team who had a satellite. And back then, satellites were real satellites, like like NASA-like satellites. But we would watch soccer made in Germany. We'd watch, professional leagues that really weren't on now. So one, it wasn't as accessible, so it wasn't, really seen as a viable sport. Whereas I watched the NBA all the time. I watched hockey. We went to Rangers games. Like all those stuff was there. Soccer wasn't. So they're really, that love for the sport really came from actually playing. But now, with MLS Next, I was lucky to have Walt Chiswich when I moved to Greensboro. I had a coach there, Danny Beamer, who was a legendary coach in terms of, both the work that he had done in Greensboro and also in Roanoke with the Roanoke Stars, which is a really big club on the East Coast now too as well. And he's been the backbone of that club. And he was my coach when he was in grad school. And I was very, very fortunate when I played for the Greensboro Buccaneers to have him. And then when I moved to Northern Virginia, played on Vista teams that had some really good coaches. I had a great coach in high school, and Ted Pease, as well. And that was for me really kind of lucky. At any point in that journey, it could have fallen off if I didn't have, a good coach or a good experience overall. And I would have played another sport because I was good at all various other sports. Nowadays with MLS Next, which is great, I think the Sounders have a good program. They don't start till U15. So my son Max played for Crossfire, which is a big club out here, starting off. And before that, even when he was in the juniors at Seattle United and local clubs, but quickly moved into the travel because you're in Seattle. You have to travel everywhere for the most part. Nothing's really up here aside from Seattle. So you're either going north of the border or you're going down to Portland or you're on a flight very, very early, very, very young. And so that is tough because it weeds out a lot of folks, social, economic, sort of from that perspective, it's a lot. It's a big commitment money-wise, it's a big commitment time-wise as well. But it allowed him to, sort of develop his love for the sport and then be able to, sort of ascend into the Sounders Academy when he was old enough. And I think starting at U15 is good because now he's old enough to really know what he likes. Not just what he's good at, but what sport does he really like. And I think the accessibility of the sport on TV and things like that makes it, a lot easier. And then with Crossfire, we took a number of international trips, very similar to what you were saying with your son. We got a chance. We've been into Holland, we've been to Madrid, we've been to Rome, we've been all these different places to play. And he's gotten a chance to see what those systems are like. And ironically, see what the kids are like there. They have a different sort of hunger than we have here because very early on, they're in these club systems where they're being judged to go to the next level, which is, the next age group. So they play with a hunger and a passion that our kids don't necessarily play. They're not worried about their place. When he played in a tournament in Belgium, I had to tell him, look, when you go on that field, these kids are going to be playing 100% because they don't know if they're going to be on this team next week, let alone next season. So they have to show now, and they're getting their sort of experience is being paid for, but much is expected of them too as well. He didn't really get that until he joined the Sounders, right? And now he's gotten it. He's a little bit older, so it's not quite like Europe, but it's good because it does help him focus, and he knows that this is what he wants to do. In terms of playing sports. But yeah, I still lament, like, high school was a big part for me in my development. When I was a freshman and playing with seniors that were going on to college, they passed on a lot of wisdom to me and really allowed me to grow as a player. And then I did the same thing overall, and there was that sort of lineage, whereas now he is more connected to the club, but it's really about, you're not really playing for anything. You're more just developing. So his games aren't really, they're competitive, don't get me wrong, but they're competitive for a different reason, more competitive for individual reasons. Whereas in high school, you're playing for a title, to win a state title or whatever it is, or your district or what have you. And so it's more pressure on him individually. And he only gets exposure to older players based on what he can physically handle. If that makes sense. So like right now he's 5'6", growing like I did, and growing really fast, but he's also 100 pounds, but he has other kids that are his age that are much bigger, more robust, and they play with the 17s, 18s. I was doing that in high school at his age because ninth graders played with 12th graders. If you were good enough to make varsity, that's what you did. And I think there's a lot of maturation that's missed in that, overall. But it's a different approach. It's tough to say what's better. I think we're producing better players on the U.S. level at a very, very high level, but I don't know if as a whole, how much of an impact or how positive it is for soccer overall. I know college soccer has really suffered in terms of that overall, and so we'll have to see. But I do believe that getting access to better coaching, better training is good. I mean, the sports science is one now that really benefits him physically. I think the coaching is better. I think the facilities are top notch. He has access to trainers and things that he probably wouldn't get through his normal healthcare. That's all good. It's just the end game, right? What are you really building towards? For us, it was to play in college. For him, his whole journey is completely different. He has to, I'm fortunate enough to have friends that are obviously in the sport, that coach in college, that are agents, that are all different things. So I can really try to amass as much information as possible, but he's going to have to make a decision very soon about his college eligibility. And he just started high school. It's it's crazy to think about, but it's one of those things where, things are getting younger and younger. And I know other sports like tennis and other places where they have, kids that are can turn pro very young is one thing, but on the other hand, it's the college experience and the high school experience to me was very valuable as well. I know I probably sound old in saying that, but it is definitely there's a lot of positives, like I said, but also some things that I worry that he might miss too as well. I mean, at some point you got to learn how to kind of grow up and be your own person as well. And if you're turning pro very early, I'm not really sure how much you're going to be able to do that. In that particular, sort of scenario. And what if you don't make it? What if you have injuries? I mean, there's a lot of luck involved as well. So, I've already had these conversations with him, which is, we can pay for a school, we can cover all these different things, but, education has always been first in our family too, as well. And reconciling that with these systems is not easy, overall. And that's what makes it difficult. I could not imagine having these conversations with my dad when I was in 9th and 10th grade.
No, it would. It's funny because you mentioned Holland and the intensity of the kids in Europe generally. I know in Holland especially, there's no other sport. Any other sport in Holland is a recreational level sport. They play basketball. They have this other basketball type sport. In the north, they have speed skating. The only travel type sport they have in Holland is soccer. So if you are playing at that level, you're hungry, you want it, and it's just a whole different mentality. But I wanted to go back to Greensboro for a minute. When I played, and things were changing when you played, but blacks did not play soccer as often when I was in school. There were some players like Eric Richter was a good player in the Fairfax area. But if most of the players of color were African or they're Caribbean, but they weren't really African Americans. African Americans still played baseball. They still played baseball. They obviously played football, and obviously they played basketball. So when you went to Greensboro, I'm sure there wasn't that many black kids playing. And was there ever tension playing in Roanoke, which can be a kind of a tense area? My father's from that area as well.
You know what? It's interesting you mentioned that. Yes, there was, but in a number of different ways. So one, coming from New Jersey, which was really, and more of an immigrant culture, a very diverse culture, and soccer was very much at the foundation of everything that we did. Then moving to Greensboro, where I went from playing on a travel team that had a sponsorship that we used to be ball boys for the New York Cosmos. Like we were as, we used to be in the locker rooms, probably shouldn't have been, with the New York Cosmos after games. You see some things, but the point is that we were as close to as professional soccer as you can get. You get to meet Pele and Franz Beckenbauer, and and all that stuff. And then I moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, and soccer, they don't even have travel soccer at that age. I had to play rec soccer for a year before travel even started. And I'm out there, I've got the latest and greatest and stuff, in terms of shoes and everything else, and and I know tactics, and these kids are just out there just asking like where are the orange slices, like they're not even really into it. And it was shocking. That year was really hard. And I actually started to discover other sports because I got frustrated. I was really good at soccer, but nobody else really took it as seriously as I did. And so then I really started to play. I started getting into football because, I was a fast kid. I was one of those kids that I could punt, I could kick, but I could return punts as well. And I could play, running back, and I could do all these different things because I had all that stamina from soccer. So it made it, a sport that I could really excel in. Then I started running track, and I started doing, because it just didn't seem like it was really that important. And then hockey was dead. I used to go to a local mall, Carolina Circle Mall, to go ice skating because that's the only rink they had in the North Carolina Triad area. And there wasn't any hockey there. I just would, just kind of put my skates on and go out there for an hour or two. Nobody was ever out there. And then eventually when the skates got too small, I just stopped skating. So geographically, it changed a lot of things. And then, you're right, being Black in the South, especially coming from New Jersey, there's that huge cultural shift. And then playing soccer, where there were no Black players. It was to the point to where, it's funny, this is how I met Eddie Pope. He played in Winston-Salem. I played in Greensboro, and we played each other. And our parents became really good friends instantly because we were the only Black parents out there. They were like, "Hey, how you doing? How you doing?" And we became friends, even though we lived an hour away and we played on different clubs. But we were the two Black kids that were out there, and we just, eventually I would guest play on his team, or he would come and play with ours. But you definitely have a tighter bond with the Black players that are out there. I know them all, and I still know them all, and we all are very close. But it does, you notice it as a kid. You can't really put your finger on it. You know what I mean? And you just, those are your soccer friends. But when I played football, it's all Black. When I played basketball, it was a mixture, but mostly Black. So you notice the differences overall. I just viewed it as, I like to play the sport, so I don't really care who shows up. And it wasn't until we started to go north to like Northern Virginia, Maryland, Philadelphia, New Jersey, then I saw more diverse teams. But that wasn't until, I lived in North Carolina until the end of my 8th grade year. It wasn't until middle school that I saw that overall. And it didn't affect me in terms of not wanting to play. But I know a lot of my friends who are Black were like, "Yeah, that's not for us. That's not for me." And a lot of friends who I thought could have been good soccer players, overall just weren't interested because of that. And I can't say that if I didn't have that interest before moving to North Carolina, if I would have ever gotten into soccer, if I had grew up, the whole time in North Carolina overall, based on the social constructs that were there, for the most part. So I definitely stood out in that regard, but because even my football coaches, they just didn't understand. You play soccer? Oh, what are you doing with that? But they were like, "Yeah, you can kick a field goal, you can punt." So as long as that works, that's fine. But it was definitely, in a way, kind of two Americas, in terms of, what were the sports that were sort of glamorized and sort of encouraged, and even my relatives. They were like, what's he playing this soccer for? I don't get it. I was always the kid at the family reunions. Oh, that's that soccer kid, kicking the ball around. Pick it up, boy. Go ahead and go shoot a basket or something like that. So it definitely made me stand out. Not sometimes positive, but it did. But I love the sport. I grew up, immersed in it. So for me, I wasn't deterred. And then I came across a great coach in Danny Beamer, who really made it fun, technically really helped to develop me too as well, really focus on the technical end of the sport. Our teams were very skillful, and he was always learning and really passed that on to us. And he was young too. So, really helped that he had a lot of energy. And I was really fortunate to have him, as a coach and sort of a guidance in terms of, my development too as well. And then when I moved to Northern Virginia for high school, I think I had a really good platform, to continue to play the sport and to kind of continue to thrive.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you had to sit out. I've never heard of anyone had to sit out to transfer from out of state. And I've heard of people having to sit out, due to like there's rumors of recruiting from one school to the other. But generally, you come from out of state, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to play. So what was the basis of that?
It's a great question. Yeah, so it was the seasons. So Virginia, if you recall, and I think it might still be the same, soccer is a spring sport.
That's right.
In other states, in North Carolina, it was a fall sport. So I moved over the winter break. So I had already played a season of soccer,
Gotcha.
and I had started playing basketball. So when I moved to Northern Virginia and played at McLean, I couldn't play varsity basketball. I played ninth grade, but I couldn't play anything that where the records counted because I'd already played a basketball season. But I could play at the junior levels. But then the soccer I had already played, so I couldn't play varsity.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I ended up having to play JV for a little bit just because I'd already played a season. But they made an exception, allow me to play JV. But it was one of those things where I kind of had to sit out the varsity year because I was good enough for varsity, but I just couldn't do it because I'd already played a season in North Carolina. And it's weird that way because that spring season, from a recruiting perspective, really, I think it hurt me my senior year, because all of the kids that were being recruited to play soccer in college were signing and kind of getting onto programs and getting into programs the fall of their senior year. Well, my season didn't start till spring. And also I was playing basketball and I had offers to play basketball. So I didn't know really what I wanted to play. So my visits were all over the place. Like I visited the military academy. I spent half the time with the soccer coach, the other half the time with the basketball coach. Both of them telling me, ignore that other guy, play for me overall. And I took a number of visits like that were dual visits overall. And even at UVA, the coach was like, hey, you could walk on here. I played summer league with a lot of the guys that were coming in, Corey Alexander, all those guys, and he was like, if you really want to play, you can do that. And I think my second year in college, my coach, Bruce Arena, had to sit me down and say, look, no more basketball. I used to play a lot of pickup basketball. He said, no more basketball. You're 100% soccer. I don't want to see you picking up a basketball. I don't want to hear of you around grounds playing basketball. I know the basketball coaches are stalking you. No more. You're a soccer player. And, but that was tough. That was hard.
So when you move to Northern Virginia, you have no control over where your parents are going to move. And back then, the best athletes with the public school. It wasn't like you necessarily try to find a private school like you may do today. But you went to McLean, and the McLean, great school, amazing area. But the basketball program had not been to the regional tournament in 18 years. I think they might not have even won a game the year before Jim Smith took over. Soccer, maybe they were better in soccer, but not to my knowledge. Football, I know they had struggled in the 80s in football. I think they maybe even lost. A coach had stepped down or whatever. So did you get any sense at all that you're coming to a school that did not have a sports tradition?
Well, soccer was really big there, and they were actually pretty good. Yeah, they were always ranked top 10 in the state. Coach Pease had a lot of success. They didn't win any state championships, but when it came to regionals, we were always one of the top 2 or 3 teams. But with basketball, there was nothing there. And see, for me, coming into high school, basketball was something that I played because I liked it. I like to just play on the Friday nights, going out, playing pickup. I just like being around, being in the atmosphere and playing. I never really took it that seriously because I was small. And, so I was athletic and, but I was 5'4", 5'5". There were guys that were way bigger than me. And I just figured this wasn't my sport, but I just like playing it, and it's indoors. So the weather's always great indoors, right? So you don't have to, worry about sort of being out in the bad elements and stuff. So I would always just kind of kick around. I became a gym rat just because I like to just be around. Like I said, I watched the NBA and stuff, but never took it seriously. It wasn't until I grew to about 6'1", 6'2", that I was like, okay, now I'm not just jumping to try to, compete for a rebound. I can actually dunk, I can actually play this, sport. And I was aware of McLean's sort of, lack of sort of success in basketball, but I didn't really much care because I didn't grow up in the area. See, because I grew up in Greensboro. And so, the high school I went to there, Grimsley, they had a good basketball team. They had a good tradition of basketball players. So for me, it was like, all right, well, maybe I can make the team then. I didn't play indoor soccer as much because they didn't have a lot of indoor facilities like they do now in the Northern Virginia area. And so it was just something I did to try to stay in shape for soccer, really, to be honest. And then when Jim Smith came along, really, introduced me to just basic concepts, spacing, just really understanding the game and breaking it down in a way that I hadn't had it broken down. And, my father was really good at this and really kind of helped me in terms of being a sport parent. He really only cared about my hustle, my effort. He said, everything else you talk to your coach about. He's like, because I don't want to tell you something that goes contrary to what your coach is telling you. You know, his idea of how to play the game is his idea. That's your coach. That's who you need to please if you want to play. But I can tell if you're trying hard, if your effort is there, you know, overall, if you're going to do this, you take this seriously, you know, in general. And so for me, it was, I viewed it as a challenge, but I figured it was also the floor was so low. We couldn't do any worse than not winning a game. So there wasn't any pressure on us, right? You know, in that regard, wasn't really, you know, there wasn't a legacy that I needed to uphold or anything like that. So it actually allowed us to relax more, you know, play a little freer. And, you know, I got to know the Northern Virginia area through basketball. I got to know all the guys at South Lakes because I had some friends my parents had some friends whose kids played at South Lakes and, you know, various other different, you know, sort of schools. So for me, basketball was neat to see all the different schools in the area and kind of learn, you know, sort of what's there. Whereas soccer, I traveled. You know, I played with a club team that traveled a lot. So we were out of the area and all of my teammates were from all different, you know, all over Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland, and DC. So that was different, right? You know, overall. So basketball was more local for me. So didn't really have much to you know to uphold, and you know, I think our first season we were like 500, you know, maybe, and we were just happy, you know, happy to win some, lose some, but we, you know, we got to the district tournament, you know, made it to like the semis or something like that, and I think then the next year, you know, we just kept getting better, and Coach Smith really did a good job. He didn't, I mean, back then there was no private schools or anything like that, but except for maybe Flint Hill, but that was just at such a high level that none of us were really ever thinking about that. But, you know, he really worked with what we had. We had a couple tall kids, we had a couple football kids, we had, you know, some guards. I was more of a slasher, and we had some shooters, and he just kind of put us together and, you know, kind of instilled that competitive nature in us. And it was good because we were well organized, and, you know, we had results. I mean, I remember playing South Lakes, and you know, my father traveled a lot, traveled out of the country, and I remember he would always fly back no matter where he was coming from for the Friday games. And we were playing South Lakes, and he came in at halftime, and we were warming up for the second half, and I think we were down 60. And he's like, "Is that scoreboard broken?" Like, that's ridiculous. And I was like, "No, Dad, we're down 60." Well, that same year, we came back and played South Lakes again. And we lost by 2. We lost by 2 at the end, but we were up the entire game. We played 4 corners the entire game, so there was no shot clock.
Was that Grant Hill or was that after Grant graduated?
That was Grant Hill. That was Grant Hill. I'm sure he probably hated that game, but we played 4 corners the entire game. I think we lost like 31-30 or something. Like, it was a horrible game to watch, probably, but we were organized, and, you know, he did the most to get everything out of us. And, you know, we were able to hang with the South Lakes, you know, of the world, and, you know, but it also, you know, get the best of our rivalry with Langley and some of the other local teams too as well. And by the time I was a senior, you know, we were in the district finals. You know, we made it to the semi, you know, the quarterfinals, I believe, of regionals, you know, and really could have made the semis, and possibly even made state. Just unheard of. But it was all because of the system that he put in place and the players that he developed. And the roles that he gave us too as well. Looking back on it, it was just, you know, amazing for us to achieve what we did with the talent that we had overall. But everybody worked hard, everybody enjoyed it, and everybody bought in, you know, overall.
Now, I read somewhere, or heard somewhere, a rumor that you got fouled at the end of an important game, and my friend Rusty Payne had to come in and shoot some foul shots for you. Is that true?
That is true. I was driving to we were playing Fairfax in the regionals.
They had a future pro baseball player on the team, right?
Yep, that's right. That's right. Brian Buchanan, who was a friend of mine and went to UVA, and we got to know each other really well. We talk about this often. And I was driving to the basket. He wiped me out. You know, it was probably about 6 seconds left. We were down 1. The game was tied, I think. And you know, I got through on a pick and roll, and he took me out, and I sprained my knee pretty bad. And I tried to get up, tried to take these free throws. I couldn't. And back then, I guess the rule was that if I had to go, if player goes out for injury, the other team gets to pick the player to come in to shoot the free throws. And Rusty hadn't been in, so they picked him, and he just stepped up and missed the first one. And I was like, oh, come on, Rusty. And he made the second one. We ended up winning that game, and it was good. And, they had a good team. Brian was still to this day sick to his stomach that they lost that game, but that got us to the quarterfinals, and it was great to see, and it was nice because Rusty had been with me. We've been together since ninth grade. In terms of playing on the ninth grade team, he had multiple brothers that played in the program, so he really understood the legacy that was there, and he was the one that kind of said, "Hey guys, we don't do this at McLean. This is really big," and kind of gave us a sense of the moment overall. And he's taken on a really great role at McLean now in terms of the athletic tradition and the history and various other things. And I got a chance to see him a couple of years ago when I was inducted into McLean's Athletic Hall of Fame. And again, one of my best friends. So the sport was really great in that regard too as well. But yeah, no, really, really good memories. And it was we weren't just happy to be there, but we were really had a good sense of what we were accomplishing for the school. And then we were a very small school too as well. So when we made it to the regional quarters, our entire school was there. That was really big because our football team wasn't necessarily as good at that time, and soccer wasn't until the spring. So the school really rallied around us overall.
Okay, so let's go back to soccer now. So I know you had a good career, and your team is solid. McLean's got a decent tradition, as you said. How did you guys do? I also know that there was I don't know about controversial game, but there was a game where the Stewart, now Liberty guys are trying to take you out and beat you up as well.
Yeah. But I was probably about 6'2" at the time, probably about maybe 165 soaking wet, so I didn't have much weight on me. To kind of give you a little bit of context, by the time my senior year in college, I was 6'3", 210. So a lot different overall. But that experience was really what was motivation to kind of build myself up to as well. And when I was in high school, I started off playing defender. I was a central defender. I was sophomore year, just playing whatever position I could play to get on the field. Had some great teammates in Didi Tashimbi and Key Reed. Key and I played together at Virginia. Didi played at William & Mary. Kevin Bourne played at JMU. We had a lot of good guys that played, top Division I soccer. And but my senior year, we had a lot of younger guys that played defense, and they were really good. And so our coach was like, "Hey, look, we need some goal scoring. You ever play forward?" I was like, "No." He's like, "You want to try?" I was like, "Sure." And because forwards are great. You don't have a lot of responsibility. I mean, you want to score goals, but if you lose the ball, nobody cares. In the back, you lose the ball. You probably cost your team the game, and everybody blames you. Right? One mistake. Up front, you can make as many mistakes as you want, and nobody cares. You score one goal, you're the hero, right? So myself and my teammate Didi Tashimbi, we just said, let's just give it a shot. We were both defenders. We moved up, and we just started scoring in bunches. And we were beating top teams in the state 7-1, 5-1. I mean, we were just running over teams. We were both fast. We were both very skillful and unselfish. But when we got to the regionals, that's when you started to run into the better coaches, and they started to game plan around you. And for me, it was just, I just had somebody just man marking me the entire game, just there. And every time I touched it, they were just kicking me, just trying to make sure that I didn't have any free moments to run at the defense. And then even on corner kicks, which was one of the things that I took with me to college in terms of, my basketball background, being able to jump, I was fortunate enough to have a vertical leap that was about around 43 inches when I got measured in college. And, but just having people just physically push you around, I wasn't used to that. And it kind of, I had to adjust to how to play against that. But that game, I think I was fouled like 17, 18 times. And, back then refereeing was different. Referees didn't give out cards for repeating fouls and stuff like that. They just looked at the severity. and they weren't really hard fouls, but they were enough to just where I couldn't get going. Still scored. We still took them to penalties and lost, but it was a team that I think otherwise, we were probably better than. And that really hurt. I thought that was our chance to go to state, because back then, if you didn't win the regionals, you didn't go to state. And we were the top team all year. We didn't lose. We set records for goals. We had shutouts. We were a really, really good team. I think there was 7 or 8 of us that played D1 soccer on that team too as well.
Was that the Stewart team that had Miguel Reyes? Those
Miguel
guys?
Reyes, Marcelo Valencia. That team. And actually, I think Miguel had already graduated. He was his younger brother, but yes.
Yeah, his brother he was he was an awesome player too.
And the ironic thing is that after that year, we all came together. We all got to know each other, came together, and joined forces on the Vista team, and we won nationals for U18.
Oh, who was your coach?
Pete Johnson.
Yeah, he's a legend, Pete Johnson,
yes,
right?
Yeah, he was my coach for Vista. So we won we went to nationals my senior year in high school and lost in the quarterfinals. Lost in the semifinals to Huntington Beach, and then we went back after my freshman year in college and won the U18 nationals. So I won 5 national titles in college. Won 4 in college, and I won one for clubs. So
did Coach Johnson move you to offense as well, or did he keep you back on defense?
He actually let me play. I kind of played offense because that after that year when we played 16 games. I had like 20 something goals, and he just was like, "Look, what you want to play, that's fine." But I would switch within the game. So if we were up 1-0 or 2-0 and it was late, I'd drop back to center back because I knew center back. That's what I grew up playing. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes I play center mid, depending on who was there too as well. So that really helped me in college, because when I got to Virginia, we were. My dad tells a story. It's pretty funny. My freshman year, I wasn't really playing much. I was on the team. I thought I was doing great in practice, but we were 19-0. We were number 1 in the country. And I was talking to my dad, I was having lunch with him before the game, and I was like, "Yeah, I think I might want to transfer." And he's like, "Why?" I was like, "I'm not playing." He goes, "You guys are number 1 in the country. You're 19-0. Like, he's like, I wouldn't play you either. Like, why change anything?" And he's like, "You need to hang in there. If you want to be the best." The reason I went to Virginia and the reason I wanted to play soccer there was I wanted to go to the best program I could. With basketball, I got recruited by mid D1 schools and stuff, and I could have, I had a lot to work on, but I could have, sort of made a career out of it in college. But in soccer, I've always felt that I was one of the better players, but I didn't play in the national teams because I played basketball. The U17 national team tryouts were in the winter. I played basketball. So you talk about like the conflict. I wanted to play the sports at McLean that I wanted to play. I did not want to go off and play with the national team and then, not be able to play high school soccer or that was not really what I wanted to do, and probably hurt me a little bit in recruiting. But when I got to Virginia, playing on Pete's teams, playing in a number of different positions, Bruce Arena started to realize, hey, I can play him at defensive mid. I can play him at outside midfielder. I can play him at forward. And it wasn't until my sophomore year where all of our forwards got injured within a 2-game span. We had no forwards left. And we were playing NC State. They had a really fast forward in Roy Lassiter. And Bruce was like, hey, this week in practice, I want you to play up front and on the second team. And I want you to try to emulate Roy Lassiter and what he does. And I said, okay, sure. And at the end of the week, he was like, can you do that in the game? Because you killed us. And I said, sure. And I came on as a sub, scored the game-winning goal against NC State. And the next 8 games, I scored a goal in every game. Never came out, and ended up scoring the game-winning goal in the national championship that year. The next year, I had my first full year as a forward, and I broke my wrist. And I missed probably 2/3 of the season, but came back and played. I played 12 games, scored 10 goals, and scored all 4 of our goals in the Final Four. And that just became, my position. And I was still learning how to play it, to be quite honest. It wasn't until my senior year that it all came together, because I finally had a set position that I could play. Then I, took that. We won that year too as well. Had a really good year, and then.
Were you striker or left wing? You were.
I was a striker. I was a forward. We played with 2 forwards, myself and a good friend of mine, AJ Wood. up front, and we were both 6'2", 6'3" strikers, that could run. That was pretty rare. And then just rode that off into the Olympic trials for '96, and MLS was just starting, and I had a chance to decide. I had taken the LSATs. I knew I wanted to go to law school. That's the direction I wanted to go. I had been admitted to the University of Wisconsin. I was going to defer for a year and try MLS, and they had a combine for players to get drafted. The thing was, I wanted to play MLS, but I wanted to play in my area. I wanted to play for DC United. I didn't want to go any other place. And so I didn't enter the draft because I wasn't guaranteed to know where I was going to go. And I was waiting for my admissions for law school. So I was trying to weigh that too as well. And then they had a supplemental draft. And I said, you know what? Bruce had just been named DC United head coach. Yeah, I think that, I had a good chance. He was the coach. He had just been named coach of the Olympic team. It's like, we had talked. I was like, I really want to stay here in DC. He's like, all right, well, we're going to pick you in the supplemental draft. And I think DC was fourth, and, third was New York, and they picked me. So I ended up having to go to New York, and then they put me on the affiliate team, the Rough Riders. And I was like, this is exactly what I didn't want to have happen. And I could not get out. I couldn't get them to trade me to DC. I just couldn't get back to the DC area. And, my wife, I mentioned she had ran track. She missed the Olympic trials due to injury. And she was going to grad school too. And we were going to grad school together at Wisconsin. She was going to grad school for nursing. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to go ahead and slide off into grad school. I think this is probably good enough. So I coached at Wisconsin as a grad assistant, and played indoor for the Milwaukee Wave for a little bit. But that was pretty much it.
Well, let's get back to Arena, because he's a big personality in the sport. What kind of coach is he? What kind of style does he have? Do you like him as a coach?
I love Bruce. I love Bruce. What's interesting is that Bruce is. I mentioned my son plays. Now, my son has met Bruce a number of times. He's been the kid escort for the national team. He's been inundated in the soccer world for, as much as a kid can. So he has no choice but to love the sport. But Bruce treats him like a grandkid. And he really was a very meticulous coach. The first time I coached with detailed scouting report on every single player that we played, what their tendencies were, what their formations were, everything. And at first it was overwhelming. There's a lot of information for a free sort of flowing sport to have. And it was my first sort of introduction to real, hands-on professional level coaching. And looking back on it, he also coached to the players as well. He didn't have a system. So for me, he would tell me, it's funny because I told my son this, but he would tell me, he's like, look, you're faster than anybody out here. He's like, now you're stronger than anybody out here. He goes, you get the ball, we don't need to build up. We need you to turn and go. You're a one-man fast break, a one-man counter. We'll catch up. Don't worry about that. But if they can't handle you, he's like, the worst thing you can do to a defender is continue to run at them. He goes, and so that's what I want you to do. It's the first time I had a coach actually tell me that. Most coaches would say, hey, fit this system, do this or do that. And I would do it, but I never really got a chance to individually, sort of express my, sort of my talents overall. And he's like, you don't need to do this. And he would stop practice and say, what are you doing? Just go by him. And it seemed so simple, but it was really, he would then stop practice and tell someone else, you're not fast. Stop doing that. You can pass the ball, move the ball. Don't get caught with it. And all those things to me helped me grow in confidence, helped me grow as a player, and helped me understand the game a lot better. And then off the field too, as well. He was definitely, just the way he carried himself. He was very confident, but he stuck up for his players, and was very respectful. And our team, we had a lot of superstars. I mean, my good friend Claudio Reyna, for example, he and I still talk because we both have sons that play. His son obviously is doing fantastic in Germany. He has another young son that's the same age as my son. But, he came in as a National Player of the Year 3 years in a row from high school. That's a massive ego to kind of, sort of put into a team that was already good, right? Overall. And he had the ability to do that. And I think you see that in MLS now. He can find talent in players that other people will just pass over. But then he can take the superstar and inject it with that talent, and then have it as a cohesive unit. So you look at what he's doing in New England now; they're setting records for wins this year, and he's still coaching and doing a great job. I mean, DC won titles, LA's won titles. I think in New England they have a good chance this year. It's all about how he brings everyone together, and he coaches everyone individually, and then brings them together collectively overall. And I think it's, that was a good example. Even in my career now, I mean, I'm a business executive at Microsoft, but I run a team. We negotiate complex, strategic agreements on behalf of the company in the cloud. And I have different personalities on my team, and I manage them the same way, kind of in the same style that he did with our team overall. A lot of lessons learned from playing under him.
So also, Nate, when you were first deciding to go to UVA, and you had a great New Jersey tradition there with Tony Meola, and there's quite a few others. But was it a thing for good players to consider going to Europe back then? Did you know anyone who thought about, hey, I'm going to go over to Holland, or I'm going to go over to Germany and try to play? Or did all good players try to play in college back then?
It was not, because the U.S. hadn't made the World Cup until, for a long time, until 1990. And when 90 happened, that's when the Europeans, I think the European scouts really started to look at the United States as a possibility. So like Claudio was the first person I knew that really had those sort of options, because he had just played in the 92 Olympics in Barcelona. And Barcelona had made him an offer to join. And he turned it down, and then eventually went to Germany after 3 years in Virginia. But it was one of those things where we just weren't seen, right? And then, but also that was a function of not having a pro league, right? We just didn't have an avenue to show. So the people that did go overseas, usually what would happen is they would graduate from college, then they'd go overseas and just try to make it, and literally just show up at these clubs and hope that they can make it, right? Sometimes starting at the lower divisions and trying to work their way up. The guys like John Harkes, would go over, but, his family is from Scotland, so we had some connections, so he'd go over there. But there wasn't any, sort of regular way to do it. And it really wasn't even a goal, quite honestly, for me. Overall, I know when I was a sophomore in high school, Ajax had scouts in the U.S. and they were interested. And my dad was like, yeah, no, he's not going to Holland.
Wow.
He was like, no, that's not something that's on the menu. He's going to college, and no thanks. Like, it just wasn't even. They had to tell us what the club was, because we never saw them on TV. Now you see them all the time, right? So it's a different time. Didn't have the platforms that exist right now overall, and it's interesting, because that brings in other dilemmas. Like I mentioned before with my son, when we went over for our international trips, the clubs loved him. They wanted him to come there, and like, we're not going to send him to Madrid or wherever. He's 12. But for them, that's what everyone does. For us, it's like, no, we're not doing that.
Well, they have technical players over there, but when they get these great athletes, that's what they don't have tons of. I mean, they have them in France and some countries. Others, when they see athletes like that, they're like, we want that guy. We have a lot of technical players. We can train them. We got 5% of our population are UEFA coaches, but we don't have, Nate Friends Jr. come in here and.
That's the one thing that Bruce did that, kind of bringing it back to Bruce, that was pretty interesting. Our UVA teams, our starting lineups were, we had 4 or 5 Black players, if not more, in our lineups. He recruited athletes too as well. And he was not shy about that. One of the things I think that holds back U.S. soccer is that you have a lot of coaches who, sort of naturally like to coach players that remind them of themselves. Whether it be, how they play or what have you, or physical limitations or what have you. Whereas when you have kids that, that have, those athletic ability, coaches don't know how to harness those. So what you see traditionally in Europe is they take those players, and France is a perfect example. The most athletic players in the middle. The Paul Pogbas, the N'Golo Kantes, the Mbappes. If those guys were here in the U.S., they'd be defenders. Or maybe a forward. So very early on, like, for example, in my son's career, he's very fast, extremely fast. The coaches just put him up front. He scored 3 goals, touched the ball 4 times. I'm like, he's not really learning how to play. He's just chasing the ball and outrunning kids. So I said, move him back, put him in the back, make him so he has to learn how to play the game.
Yeah,
But I had to,
make him think because he's
yeah,
playing striker.
exactly.
He's just
But
gonna.
the coach is like, he just scored 3 goals. And I'm like, yeah, but he needs to learn how to play because it's much bigger than just winning, at the U10 age. He needs to learn how to play the game. He needs to develop these skills overall because his athletic ability is great, but he needs to learn how to, become a soccer player. And the coaches sometimes just didn't understand that. They thought I was being difficult. And then being able to be honest, I'm like, I just want him to develop as a player. Thank goodness that he had parents that understood the sport, that could help him with that. And I've actually moved him on teams because of that. The coaches didn't understand it. It helped him develop as a player. But we still struggle as a country with that, whereas Bruce has always been ahead of his time with that overall. He took me and was like, look, you have a 43-inch vertical. You can run. I used to work out with some of the football players that were preparing for the NFL draft because it was a good way for me to stay in shape. And our strength coach, Coach Fierce, would let me do it, which was great because they had a nicer weight room. We had like the crappy weight room. They had the really, the recruiting weight room and all that stuff with the music and the nice pads. So I was trying to get in there all the time to lift weights. And he's like, hey, if you can help me get these guys ready for the draft, that'd be great. So I used to run the 40s against them. I used to do the vertical, the shuttle runs and the vertical jumps just to push them. And, I could run a 4.4 40, and have it timed. So Bruce was like, I see all this stuff. Now I got to get the most out of it. And I could put you in the back and yeah, that'd be great. But I need you to go up front, go harass that goalkeeper, go run by that defender. That's where you can change, how we play. And my senior year, we were completely different than what we were in my freshman year. My freshman year, we methodically built up. We kept the ball the entire game. It was like we were on a power play. And, we would win games 1-0 or 2-0, but we dominated, but we didn't really have that dynamic ability. My senior year, we maybe had the ball 50% of the time, maybe less. But when we got it, we broke. And when we broke, we scored. So we were scoring 5-6 goals. Game was over. And then we could sit back and let the other team have the ball. But, we were up. So it was completely different style of play overall based on the players that we had. And that is the same coach, completely different system, overall. And when I started playing professionally, I realized the level of coaching that I had overall. No shade to the coaches I had professionally, but it was just the ability to adjust game by game, player by player was incredible in terms of the way that he could, he really knew the individuals and he really went out of his way to recruit athletes, and he recruited Black players that a lot of players, we all had something in common on there, with the exception of a few, was that we weren't heavily recruited by a ton of schools. I wanted to go to Notre Dame to play, and they wrote me back and said, hey, we only recruit national players. And we ended up playing Notre Dame, I think it was my junior year. I scored 3 goals against them. And I went up to the coach and said, hey, you remember me? And he's like, yeah, I remember you. And I was like, really? Yeah, I thought you only recruit national players. But the point is that—
I thought you were Rudy.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. He just, he didn't know. I sent him the tapes and everything, and he was like, he just didn't see it. And the coach came from Greensboro, knew me from when I was a kid, just was not interested, just didn't see how it would fit. Bruce was like, hey, absolutely. Those to me are the good coaches. And that's kind of bringing it back all full circle. That's what I see in the MLS academies. They are bringing in kids from all walks of life, and the talent identification is just better. Overall, they remove the parents out of it, and they just focus on the kids. And I think in the long run, U.S. will be, soccer will be better for it, and I think it is now overall. But that's the big difference between then and now.
Just real quickly about you scored the game-winning goal in 2 straight national championships. There are people that play sports. I played many years of basketball, football. I may have gotten a winning touchdown or something like that, and maybe a winning basket in basketball. But in all the years I played, to win 2 championships, that must have been just an amazing feeling.
It was, for me, it was a lot of validation because I did have an identity crisis when I got to college because I didn't know I was a utility player and I could fill in. So every game, I didn't know where I was going to go in, but I knew I was going to get 30 minutes in the game. So if our right wing, Brad Agus, cramped up, I went in for him. If our defensive midfielder, got hurt, then I was going in for him. And so for me, I wanted to just settle in a position. So when I got a chance to be a forward, I was like, I got to score. That's the mark. That's what I got to do. And so when I did get a chance to go in my sophomore year when we were playing University of San Diego, I knew they were tired. It was a very muddy field. They got heavy legs. I got to bring it. And we just went at them, and it was a 0-0 game, was able to get through, just constantly running the defense. And, was able to get that breakthrough on a rebound off my own shot, and it kind of cracked the game open. But that then gave me confidence the next year to say, okay, how can I improve on that? And when I got to the finals, I was out for most of the year with a broken wrist. I came back playing with the cast, and I was like, okay, this is my time to prove it. End of the season, a lot of guys are banged up. I came in fresh, and we were playing, for example, we played Princeton in the semifinals, and I scored 3 goals and we won 3-0. They played a zone, and I was like, this is great. I'm going at these guys. I scored 3 goals in the first half. The next game we played South Carolina, tough team, but I knew that they had some taller guys, but they were a little bit overconfident when it came to like corner kicks and stuff. They didn't mark up. And I knew that if I can get around and start, I can get over these guys. And I ended up scoring on a header, scoring on another free kick too as well. That was a lot of that was scouting. A lot of that was, just really just, trying to make my mark, overall. And to have those opportunities was great. For me, it was just about taking advantage of them. And I wasn't really afraid of the moment. For me, it was always about staying calm. I kind of passed it on to my kids, just, I'm not a big rah-rah person. I feel like that just drains your energy. I'm more stay calm, chew some gum, relax, do what you got to do overall. And I think that, those experiences were great. I think they make, again, it's funny how everything comes full circle, but it's made me a better sports parent, overall. When my kids are playing big games or something and they get nervous, I'm like, just relax. There's nobody here. Take it easy. Yeah.
I mean, with the athletic ability and the mental capacity to stay calm, that's just a deadly combination, and especially they're getting the tactical with the academy. But also, I did want to get back to your UVA life a little bit. I know you met your wife there. So I went to UVA in 84 I started fall 84 for undergrad, and I was gone in 91, just about the time you're getting ready to get started. Mm-hmm. Now, Northern Virginia to me, in some ways was liberal in that I felt like I had a lot of white and black friends. I didn't think about race that much in terms of, I actually, I was close friends with almost all the black folks at Robinson because there wasn't that many, but I didn't think about race that much. I didn't really focus on it. But when I went to UVA, you were confronted with race. I mean, it was completely a segregated socially campus. The black students had their parties, they had their associations. The white students had Rugby Road. There were some people that could cross over, some athletes could, but there was very little. And it was an adjustment for me to be in a more of a Southern atmosphere, which I wasn't really used to. Yeah. It was a good experience, and I learned to deal with it. And I learned that, all in all, people are people. You just have to break through certain situations and you're fine. What was your experience like? You're a soccer player. The soccer team has a huge profile on campus, but not necessarily with the black students. The black students weren't paying attention to soccer. But of course,
it was interesting. You mentioned that. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because that's how it was before I got there. Because I spent, I did come down to UVA when I was in 9th grade. Bruce Arena was the coach of my state team, and I got a chance to visit there. And that's kind of what put the school in my back of my mind early on. But then when I got there, as well, I came down to watch some games, and you're right. Soccer definitely wasn't one that, it was definitely viewed more as a white sport. But when I came, like I mentioned, we had a lot more black players. And as a result, our crowd started to diversify a little bit too as well. But what was interesting with that overall is that, my Northern Virginia experience, I was very similar to what you said, but before that I lived in Greensboro, North Carolina, which was pretty segregated too as well. So I had seen kind of both sides of that overall. It was one of the things where when I look back at my time at Virginia, there were times where you could see the clear divide. But I also started to kind of look at the individuals that kind of were at those divides and where they came from, right? Some of them are from the deep South, other areas. No, making no excuses for anybody, but started to understand, like you said, why people have sort of their beliefs and why people don't. I know I had a lot of friends that were white that were from up north. I had some friends, and I had friends from the West Coast and various other places. So you start to get to understand. For me, it was kind of my awakening and understanding the geographic differences of the country, right? And it kind of helped formulate, like, where do I want to live? Where do I want to, sort of, plant my stake in this country someplace overall. And even going to the Midwest for grad school, I still I'm still learning that. But that was interesting because soccer at the time was becoming more diverse. And as the team got more, sort of more awareness was driven around the team, the stars just weren't white; they were Black too as well. And I was very much happy and really enjoyed being part of the Black community. But also I had a lot of friends from high school that went to Virginia. I had a lot of friends from different areas that were all different, sort of walks of life. So for me, I had a pretty diverse friend group coming in, mainly be coming from Northern Virginia. But, there were those differences, those stark differences that I did see overall. And I talked with my parents about this a lot, overall, to kind of make sense of a lot of things. Even the tradition, I'm gonna be honest with you, the tradition of the school, being rooted in Thomas Jefferson, I didn't like it. I remember when they took us to Monticello to visit, I hated it. And I remember, I took a summer program before I went to Virginia, sort of a bridge program to kind of help you acclimate for
summer prep.
Summer prep, that's right. Yeah, for minority students. In fact, that's where I met my now wife. She was a year ahead of me, my wife, Pam Lemons, who are now Pam friends. And we met. She was a former summer prep student and came to visit one of her friends, and we actually met there. And then we actually, sort of started dating probably about 3 or 4 years later when we kind of crossed paths again. But we went to Monticello, and I hated it. And it's like, why are you walking around with scholarly face? I'm like, this is terrible. This is horrible. Like, we're trying to glorify this and trying to gloss it over. This is bad. And they're like, oh, well, there's Sally Hemings. And I'm like, well, Sally Hemings was kind of forced to, play with it. Like, this is horrible. There's nothing about this is good. And, so those traditions always, I wouldn't say bothered me, more annoyed me, because, I thought they were always trying to gloss over, the evils that were underlying them overall. But, be that as it may, still was the University of Virginia, still where I chose to go to school. So I never really kind of excused those things. And I know that probably put me at odds with some people who sort of glorified that stuff, overall. But I started to really, one way I kind of channeled that was I took note of who those people were, made sure, what, not going to really interact with those folks overall. And that didn't happen as much, but it did happen overall. And I think that was a big part of the, maturation process that I had at the time.
My guess is the mood also had changed, between 84 and 91. Those are the Reagan years, the Bush years. Very conservative time. School is very conservative. Yeah. My guess is when the Clinton years came, my guess, and most colleges became a little more liberal. My guess is things change on grounds, but these things they're often baby steps. So.
A lot of it is led by the faculty. I noticed the faculty had changed. I noticed when I was in law school, for example, I went to the University of Wisconsin Law School. My father went there, for example, and he was one of the first, they call LEO students, legal education opportunities, but it's kind of like summer prep, where they have a support group for minorities. And he was one of the first students in that program. And so I was a second generation LEO student. And a lot of my professors in law school were his classmates. But it was a very diverse faculty, and the school was 14% Black, which, is unheard of for, top 25 law school overall. But, the flip side of that was that it made it tough for me too, as well, because the professors had no problems calling on me because they knew my name. So if there was ever a question in the Socratic method, they're like, Mr. Friends. And I was like, okay, here we go. But it made me a better student. But the point being is that their pockets overall, the undergrad was not like that at all. In fact, the running sort of joke around University of Wisconsin was that if you were Black, you went to law school. Because that's where all the Black students went overall. So seeing that in the Midwest, seeing it at Virginia, you kind of get to understand it. And even out here, where we live in Seattle now, and the University of Washington, it's not very diverse in its way. But then comparing that, my daughter goes to the University of Arizona, and she's a microbiology major, and
Wow,
she had a very similar sort of choice that I had in terms of play basketball or not. She was very good at basketball. She played at Lakeside School, which is where Bill Gates and Paul Allen met. Went to a private school. And basketball helped her. Sort of go there and achieve things, and did great academically, and is at University of Arizona now. And it's very much segregated too as well in certain ways. Each state is different overall, but I think that's just part of the process that you learn in college of how to deal with society as it is, but also find your place in it too as well, and not necessarily accept the limitations that are there, but to understand them, overall.
So I've taken a lot of your time here. But I really appreciate this. So when you finish, before you went to law school, when you finished college, you couldn't have done much better in college. You scored tons of goals. You won 4 national championships in 4 years. Won a club championship in the meantime. I saw a video of you playing University of San Francisco, and you remind me of a West Ham striker. I mean, you're a perfect English striker at the time. You're fast, you're athletic. I mean, they would if you grew up in that culture, you would have been I forgot the Liverpool left-footed striker that they had, but in the 80s. But you remind me of that guy. Do you ever have any regrets that you grew up in a time of when soccer was in a relative stone age in America? I mean, it's if you had your son's opportunities, and I know you want him to do better than you. That's all parents want that for their children. But do you ever wish you had more opportunities to go to the next level?
Not necessarily. I would have loved to have the more options, because I mean, the way I look at things, the more options you have, the better you are. I don't know if I would have chosen differently. And that's just two things, right? So on the option side, I would have loved to have been more aware of the sort of the global soccer world. But I don't think I would have chosen that route anyway. At the time, my girlfriend, now my wife, we had plans to go to grad school. I really wanted to go to law school. I had a lot of family tradition at the University of Wisconsin. I was excited to go. I'd kind of been building up to that. So that was one thing. Soccer didn't pay a lot, quite honestly. And I grew up in an upper middle class family. I mean, I'm from Great Falls. For me, I was like, I want to get my career going. Overall, that's what I was focused on. I didn't want to have to go overseas to do that, because then I don't see my family. I don't know where my girlfriend, now fiance, she gonna come. Like, there was a lot of question marks personally that I probably wouldn't have taken advantage of. And I know I talked to Eddie Pope about this too as well, about why he never went overseas. He has family here, he has wife, he has a lot of different things. But I would have liked to have just been more aware. It's tough because, again, nothing's on TV, there's no internet, right? It definitely is a stone age. With my son, on the other hand, I actually like that he has these options, because he and I have discussions, sort of life, discussions about, what he wants to do, where he eventually wants to end up, what are the things that he wants to pursue. And I get to know him better as an individual, as a person. My daughter and I went through this too with basketball. She tore ACL, got a chance, in her sophomore year, and was a starter as a freshman, averaged something like 12, 13 points on a team that was one of the best in the state. Missed the U16 national team trials. She's a 5'10" guard, that could really shoot, and was really athletic. And so, but that injury helped her now look at things outside of the sport. And she started working with the drama club, started getting with the AV club, started doing a lot of different things, and really discovered her love for medicine. My wife is an oncology nurse manager. And, now she's a microbiology major. She's on an academic scholarship. And, the coach at the University of Arizona used to be assistant coach at the University of Washington, and was like, hey, to get involved with the program somehow. And she's like, I'm good. I like where I am, but the fact is that she came to that conclusion, but she had those options. And my son is the same way. His dream is to play at Virginia. I took him back a couple of years ago to play in the alumni game. And as a 12-year-old, and he was running by those guys like left and right, because I'm too old for that. And the coach was like, hey, where does he want to go to school? And I was like, he wants to play here. He grew up coming to these games. And he's like, all right. We watch Virginia games streaming. The Sounders, they don't want to hear that. I'm not concerned about that at all.
Yeah.
So when they set goals, he's like, I want to play in college soccer. And they're like, yeah, that's not really, you might not be, you're not on that track, right? So we have to then have those conversations, but he has that full on sort of understanding of the world, overall. So it's not so much regrets. It's, you can't change the times you grow up in. I'm still a dinosaur. I still think high school soccer was great. And I wish he could play high school soccer, but I understand why he doesn't. Overall, whereas with him, he's like, why would I do that? I don't want to do that. I want to play Real Salt Lake in Utah last week, or I want to go to Vancouver. Like, I don't want to play, the local high school. Like, for him, so it's just a different perspective overall. But I think it helps me be a better parent. I think it helps me, walk him through what options he has and let him choose what direction he wants to go. And ultimately, my parents did that with me too as well. All the sports that I played, they let me choose. They were like, play as many sports as you want. Then you can choose what you want to do. You have no regrets. So like, I didn't play baseball. I don't regret it. I like baseball, but it just wasn't enough action for me. Hockey wasn't, I could have done it, but it wasn't one of I did it. I like the social aspect of it because I like the kids that played. I was okay at it. Basketball, I grew into it. My dad never forced it on me. And then when I came to him in 8th grade and said, hey, I want to play basketball in high school, he said, all right, let's get to it. We went out and we started working on jump shots, and then I got a chance to meet Coach Smith, and he kind of turned me into a real player. And soccer was always something that I just did. I liked it. I wanted to be around it. Like, just, I miss even being on the field. Like with my son now, my dad and I used to go out and throw the football in the yard, or throw baseball really, for the most part, because he played baseball growing up. My son and I go across the street to the soccer field, and we just kick the ball around all the time. We talk about different spins to put on the ball and different, work on his crossing and all those other different things. And, even though my body sometimes tells me I shouldn't do that, it's still a lot of fun because that's our time to kind of hang out. My daughter and I are the same thing. We go out and shoot 300-400 jump shots. Just to this day, when she comes home, we still go to the park, shoot jump shots, and that's one of those things where, to me, that's the value of sports overall. Even when you're past playing, still a lot of value in it, in general. And it helps me connect with my family. I've got nieces and nephews that are younger now, that are very young. And as I get closer to retirement, I start thinking about where we want to live. And most of my family is kind of clustered in Central Florida. Eventually we'll probably move there. And my goal is to coach my nieces and nephews. I coached my daughter playing soccer when she was 6 all the way until she was 12. And then I coached a basketball team. And it really wasn't so much about, coaching them and, making sure they had a good time. It was kind of about that, but it was also, for me, my kids got to see sort of, their parents, and my wife was a manager, their parents in roles of leadership overall. And I think my daughter eventually she'll make a great coach if she ever wants to do it in her side time. And I think my son too, as well. He referees sometimes, and it's, helps their communication overall. So for me, the all in all, sports is really just a good avenue for, developing good people. And I don't view it as I missed out. I got a lot out of it. I mean, I went to grad school, coached in grad school. I had an out-of-state scholarship for law school. And when I coached, they gave me an in-state tuition. I actually made money in law school.
That's great.
From the sport. And I got a chance to influence a lot of people's lives when I was a grad assistant. So I wasn't that far removed from playing in college at the University of Wisconsin, too, as well. So my second and third year in law school, I was a coach as well. So the sport, I got a lot out of the sport, more than probably most people. And for me, whether I could have played professionally or whatever, the lifespan of a soccer player is maybe 30 years, and it's all kind of downhill. If I could have made it that far with, injury free and everything else, I think I would have gone the same route that I went, overall in general. I mean, MLS was early. Look, we were taping our own ankles when it first started. Now, looking at it, it is in a great spot. I mean, it is a legitimate professional sport. We go to Sounders games all the time. I look at the atmosphere and I enjoy it. I actually get more out of the sport watching my son play than I do playing myself. I just enjoy it that much in terms of watching them perform and watching them play and get enjoyment out of it, and seeing the successes, the highs and the lows, and and everything else. And then, talking with them about the sport too as well. You get to know them better as people. So it's for me, it's been a really good, sort of, it was a good opportunity sort of to leverage the sport in a number of different ways that are sort of non-traditional, whether it be in law school as a grad assistant, whether it be through coaching. A lot of the girls that I coach with, my daughter, still very close with their parents. A lot of the kids that I knew that played soccer with my son, still very close. Get to watch these kids grow up and develop, help players that want to go to play at Virginia. Still very close with the coaches there. George Gelnovich, the current coach, was the assistant coach when I was at Virginia. Overall, and their assistant Matt Schulis came in a year after me. So I know those guys. I've known those guys all my life. So for me, if my son ends up playing there, that's great. But if he also ends up going the route of playing for the Sounders, we'll support him one way or the other, wherever he goes. But even the national team coach, Greg Berhalter, we've been friends since college. He was Claudia Reyna's high school teammate. He used to come hang out with us. And he and Eddie Pope played at UNC. And I was emailing him the other day, congratulating him on their qualifications and stuff. So, I think I made good choices. I think, with the options that I had overall. But I'm really, really thankful that my son has a ton of options and really gets to see the sport, on a global basis, overall.
I think the path you chose, and it's easier to have enduring success in sports. It can be so fleeting. So it's hard to argue that. I did notice that, when we started this Facebook group for Nova Legends soccer players, and I didn't play soccer myself. My sister was a good player. She's actually the controller for University of Washington. She lives in Seattle. But she played soccer. Yeah, really, really good player. But I noticed that you're not in the Washington area Soccer Hall of Fame. And after I saw what you accomplished, and I was talking to Coach Smith, and then I did research. Your record was unbelievable, but you kind of slipped under the radar. I mean, I think, as you said before, maybe playing basketball, you didn't get in the national pool. Your reputation for soccer didn't grow like it probably should have because you played basketball.
Yeah.
And then in college, you were just part of an incredible program, but you just happened to score the winning goal. And I think you were a leading scorer at least 1 year or maybe 2 years, right, on the team.
2 years, yeah.
So I mean, your sporting accomplishments are unbelievable. So I'm sure your son's going to be even better, and your daughter will accomplish whatever her goals are as well. So anyway, I just want to thank you for doing this. I've been excited to talk to you for the last few months. I'm glad you agreed to do it.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I love the communities that are out there, and I think it's your podcast series is great. It brings back a lot of very, very good memories, and like being able to see Coach Smith. I did get a chance to see him a few probably about 6 years ago. And I went back, and my daughter was playing basketball and got a chance to go see him play at Chantilly with Rusty. And sports is always a good way for me to keep in touch with all of my friends and folks that mentors and that really have helped me along the way. And so this is great to reconnect, and kind of relive these memories. They're all very, very good memories. And like I said, it's great memories, but also really help educate me towards how to continue to support my kids and everything else. And then I compare that to my wife's experience. She's from rural Southern Virginia and was only recruited to run track because the football coach came down to watch a football player that was running against her and was like, "Look, I don't know anything about track, but that woman's fast."
What high school did she go to? What high school did she go to?
Floyd High School, Floyd County, right outside of Roanoke, a really small high school. And and then we met in college, and then comparing our experiences, in college, and then also we went to grad school together and then got married after that. And, as our kids were born and going through their activities, she grew up in an area where they didn't have youth sports. You just played high school sports and that was it. She was running track in high school when she was in 7th grade because the high school and middle school were all together, and her uncle was a football coach. So it's just, everybody's, sort of experiences are different, but I feel very fortunate now comparing my experiences to others. All the coaches that I've had along the way, I was really, really fortunate with the coaches I've had, both on the soccer side and basketball side. And so for me, for my son, for him to have the ability to, basically jump into a pro type atmosphere as a 14-year-old. That's amazing, overall. So yeah, no, it's been great to reminisce about all of this. And I really enjoy sort of connecting with former athletes too as well. In general, I was a couple of years ago working for Microsoft, was visiting Turner Sports and got a chance to see Grant while he was doing a broadcast. And it was interesting to kind of reminisce about playing in high school, playing against each other in high school. And even when he was at Duke, a lot of the soccer players knew him, and a lot of my friends in the basketball team knew Grant. And you just kind of, cross paths at various times in your lives. It's nice to see everybody doing well, but all kind of rooted back in that Northern Virginia tradition of sports.
Yeah, it's been great to connect. Grant reached out. He heard we were doing this, and he was gracious enough to give us the time. And once that happened, it kind of opened the floodgates. If Grant will talk to you, anyone will talk to you. So it's been a great way to keep a great network of memories and people. Also, we learn from each other. Whenever I do these podcasts, I like to talk to successful people like yourself, because you learn what makes people tick. And, I'm a 55-year-old guy, but I try to get better every single day.
Yeah,
so it's been great personal development for me as well.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate, to that. And like I said, for me, from a parent perspective, it really helps keep me grounded, and I think helps me to, provide some, guidance to my kids too as well, as they go through things and, overall. So yeah, now sports has been great. Northern Virginia was where all of that stuff was rooted. Even thinking back to, there's a little park in Vienna where we used to play pickup. Nottoway Park. Yeah. So growing up, when I went to McLean High School, I lived in Vienna. I lived in Wolftrap Woods, right by Wolftrap. So I used to ride my 10-speed to Nottoway, and have like this big jug of water, and would sit there and wait, because you got to get there early, because if you didn't get on the court. And if you didn't get on the court, you can forget it. And you can get.
You go in the third court. You get like the third court way back there.
Yeah. No, you got to get the right court now too as well. But you had to get the right court. And see, this is before cell phones. So nobody told me when nobody's going to show up. So I'd be there at 9 a.m. and just be shooting. Then everybody would show up, whether it was noon or 11 or 1. Guys from South Lakes, guys from Chantilly, guys from Madison, guys from Marshall, all come. We'd all get together, and we'd run till 5, 6 at night till it got dark. Then I'd take my water jug, stop by 7-Eleven, fill it up, ride my bike back home. Those were good times. Those were good times.
Nate, we played against each other. I was there on Nottoway about that time. I remember you, because we were like we both went to the hole strong. You were you'd grown by the time you were a senior. You were much taller than me. I was only 5'9" then. But I went to the hole strong. We used to play against each other. I remember you. People say, "Oh yeah, that's Nate Friends," but I don't think we ever talked a lot.
Gotcha.
I was there in those days, and because everybody was there on Saturday mornings.
That was so much fun. It was so much fun. Yeah, that's one thing that, nowadays my son, for example, he does that with his friends in the area, and I kind of started it when we first moved here. He's a Seattle kid, so we moved here when he was in preschool, so he doesn't know Northern Virginia. He knows Seattle, but we have the parks here are beautiful. We have a full soccer field across our street from our neighborhood. And so as he started playing, I started getting his neighborhood kids, and I started bringing out little goals, and they would all come and meet at the park. Parents would we'd all kind of sit back, and just watch him play. They still do that to this day. They still go out there after if there's a soccer game. He may have played a game already. He'll drop his stuff, go out there, call his buddies, because he has his own cell phone now, and they'll all come out there, and they'll be out there till dark shooting and playing around. And I just think back to Nottoway, like that's where, you could get somebody that maybe, is in college, and they'll pull you aside and give you a tip. Hey, you might want to go to your right or whatever, and you would just learn how to play, and, but you competed too. You're playing for something as well. And that was just a lot of fun. And then when high school basketball started, you get to see everybody on different teams, but them, right? And so you kind of feel that camaraderie. And then when you start playing all-star games, playing in summer leagues, or for me, going to the shoe camps, I started doing that when I was a junior. And all the Northern Virginia guys, we all kind of huddled together because we all knew each other. And, back then it was like, you want to make the top all-star game at the end of the camp. And, if you didn't make it, you feel bad. But if one of your partners made it from Northern Virginia, you felt good, right? Overall. And I remember making the All-Star game, the last All-Star game at one of the camps, and all the guys from Northern Virginia were there cheering me on, and that's like, you feel that camaraderie, and those are lifelong friends, overall. And so as we move around the country, you still stay in touch through Facebook and all various social media. It's a lot easier now to do that. And that to me is what's great. Overall. And even when I travel with my son, a lot of those guys come out to watch, and I get to meet their sons who are playing too as well, overall. So you get that community is still very close knit, for sure.
It is. We're very lucky. So, well, Nate, next time I visit my sister, we got to meet for a beer. So, or if you're ever
absolutely.
In town, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
If you're ever in town here, I know we probably have a lot of visiting too, but maybe we can hook up here. But it was great to talk to you and meet you. You're an inspiration, and wahoo wah, you did a lot of great things. So I'm glad we got a chance to do this.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's keep in touch.
Absolutely, definitely.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, Nate. Bye-bye. Thank you, buddy.